Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 6. Yet again, another international game, a phenomenal matchup to kick things off on Thursday night, and a game that you may or may not want to sit down and watch in its entirety on Sunday Night Football, but that's not going to stop us around these parts. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined by my esteemed colleague and co-host. Ladies and gentlemen, he's back from a one-day hurricane hiatus, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, I'm glad to see that Mother Nature was relatively kind to you down there in South Florida.
Not bad at all. You get 40, 50-mile-an-hour gusts, some rain. Other than that, everything is copacetic this way. You just pray for the folks a little bit more in the middle of the state and in the Tampa area. It looks like a lot of those folks were ravished. Fortunately, flood insurance, hurricane insurance, all of that good stuff should cover the repairs, but thoughts and prayers with those folks.
Agree. Never a great situation. We know some folks recovering from Hurricane Helene, like we mentioned on yesterday's college show, and plenty that'll be sorting out the aftermath of Hurricane Milton. So we wish those guys and girls nothing but the best. Some things are more important than handicapping and breaking down NFL football. But we can only control what we can, and we have 5 games on the docket to try and get to today. And I mentioned the marquee game on Thursday night, so we may as well get right into it, where it's a battle of teams fighting to be first.
Starting with the Thursday Night Football game.
You know what? Every now and again, I like to throw a wrench in here. Sometimes I like to go back and revisit Monday. Sometimes I like to keep you on your toes. But we'll start with Thursday.
I figured the first question was coming was the national narrative that was out there yesterday. You couldn't find a sports channel without the discussion of Aaron Rodgers. I figured that was coming. Are we saving that for Monday?
We're saving that for Monday. We're saving that for Monday.
So we're going to be late. We're going to be late on the conversation.
We have prominent Jet fans that were tuning in today hoping they were going to get bonus Jets coverage, and spoiler alert,
that's not happening.
They're not getting bonus Jets coverage. I'm not talking about that franchise twice in the span of 2 NFL shows, but we'll talk about...
I'm glad he texted me last night. I'm glad he showed up and you guys could go to the game together. That's a rarity.
He got a guilt trip from his wife for opening night, so that was the main reason. I think he saw about 30 seconds of play. He was on his phone more or less the entire game. But that's...
As I said, he was nonstop texting me. I was trying to get some sleep.
Yeah,
what's going on
different
here,
discussion,
guy?
Different day entirely. Thursday Night Football, 49ers on the road at the Seahawks. The Seahawks playing their 3rd game in 11 days as they vie to be atop the NFC West. We've seen this number kind of move all over the place. We saw it open a juice 3, get down to 3 flat. 3.5 more or less the prevailing number. Now we're down to a soft 3.5 with the 49ers installed as a road favorite. Total opened as low as 46.5, climbed as high as 50 at a prominent shop. Now settling in comfortably on game day at a 49. And when we look at the 49ers, they're the first team in 36 years since the 1988 Broncos Payne to have a losing record through 5 games, despite being a 4-plus point favorite in each of their first 5 games of the season. Blown leads, they're no stranger to that either, squandering a glorious opportunity to hold a 2-touchdown threshold against the Arizona Cardinals last week. Meanwhile, Seattle, what goes up must come down, and a defense that looked great playing against rookie quarterbacks and inexperienced pivots hasn't exactly looked the part over the last 2 weeks. I'm not sure facing the 49ers off a loss is the ultimate get-right spot either. When we look at a game like this, and we can start on either side of the ball, which side are you most intrigued to watch? The Seattle offense that's been extremely pass-happy over the last couple weeks against a 49ers defense dealing with some key absences on the back end, or the other side where the 49ers offensively have looked relatively clunky, to use your term, operating against the Seahawks defense that is a little bit healthier on the defensive line now, but has a massive loss on the back end, not where you want to be deficient against this 49ers passing attack.
Let's start right there. That was a good lead-in. And we love us some Mike McDonald. We've praised him for multiple years at both the college and pro level. I think if you're capturing all 5 data points this season, you'll just see very surface level Seattle's 10th in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency. However, this isn't new to our listeners. We discussed this ahead of Monday Night Football when Seattle traveled to Detroit. That regression was certainly imminent before the injuries. And now the injuries have piled up, and I think those two elements are happening simultaneously as the difficulty in schedule also ticks up. And so all three factors point in the same direction here, and it's why we saw this total initially tick up as low as 46, got as high as 50. It feels like every single total that has a 5 in front seems to get bet under no matter what. So we saw that early this morning. We're back at 49, but certainly move to the over from open. I think the regression being obvious just comes from the schedule, right? It was playing Bo Nix in his first NFL start, and then you had two of the worst offensive lines back-to-back weeks in New England and Miami, and then playing Jacoby Brissett, who was benched this week, and then the combination of Skylar Thompson and Tim Boyle. Injuries are the second factor. Tonight, Seattle's still without Byron Murphy. Nwosu, you mentioned that critical injury in the secondary to Reek Woolen. Two guys Mike McDonald insists will play are Boye Mafe and Derek Hall. If they do go, though,
there's no way they're 100%.
Neither are 100%. Julian Love is also battling a hamstring injury. He's graded out the Seahawks' best defender this season, highly questionable. It's a short week. Even if he does try to go, is it, one sprint and he's back on the sideline? So, there are some guys here that are going to try to go that are far from 100% as well. And the one offense Seattle has played in the class of the 49ers was Detroit, and Detroit's offense wasn't humming by any stretch either. To use my own term here, they were also a little clunky at the time of that meeting, and the Lions finished with the best EPA per play of any team in Week 4.
Jared Goff still perfect throwing the football against that Seahawks defense.
Yeah, and so when I kind of assess the 49ers offense, to me, you're close to, if not buying them at their bottom. Surface level, 10th in schedule adjusted efficiency, 7th in EPA per play. But you have holdouts from key cogs to start the season, injuries to some vital players. But where the real dip has been for the 49ers offense, which is kind of skewing the overall metrics, are the variance areas. San Francisco is slightly above average in late down efficiency. They were top 5 last season. If you look at the rate of drives that are reaching the red zone, it's actually higher this season than last year for the 49ers, but San Francisco is 30th in red zone conversion rate, which is another variance area I expect to improve. The 49ers have been super explosive. Brock Purdy playing the best ball of his career by far, second in intended air yards per pass attempt at 10.5, yet his completion rate over expectation, second best in the NFL. So he's pushing the ball down the field. He's threatening down the field. He's being aggressive, and he's completing balls at a ridiculous rate. Brandon Ayuk looks like he's finally in form after a big week. Who would have thought? Streaming, playing video games in the off season.
You take a month off. You take a month off. You sit out of camp. Who would have thought it might have taken him a little while to get into the swing of things offensively?
51% of the 49ers air yards and targeted 12 times last week. So that's where Reek Woolen being out is massive. Another matchup that's interesting is George Kittle, and he is battling a rib injury, but did get a full in on Wednesday. Let's monitor that. And there was an emphasis, you remember back in our season preview, about Mike McDonald replacing the entire linebacker core, trying to find guys that could cover, with Dotson and Baker now being that duo in the middle. It was for this exact matchup in division against the 49ers, with the anticipation of Kittle over the middle and Debo over the middle and CMC catching balls out of the backfield. That was why McDonald had to change that grouping. What's bizarre is, individually, Dotson has been as advertised in coverage. Baker's been solid. Mentioned Julian Love at safety having a career year. Somehow as a team, though, Seahawks have allowed the 4th highest reception rate to tight ends. They're bottom 10 in the league in yards per target allowed to the position as well. Overarching here, I expect the 49ers to move the ball tonight down to down. How good it looks on the scoreboard ultimately comes down to the improvement in the red area, though, Todd.
And when we talk about that red area, I mean, you mentioned some of the numbers. You figure by nature of the offensive minds they have there, the personnel, the talent, there's going to be positive regression. It's just a question if it comes tonight or it takes them a little bit longer. Hopefully a Christian McCaffrey waiting in the wings to try and give them another key piece. Now, defensively for the 49ers, I mean, they gave up a lot of rushing yards last week to the Arizona Cardinals, but a big chunk of them came to Kyler Murray. And despite Geno Smith going for 70-plus rushing yards against the Giants, I wouldn't say he's exactly the same style runner as Kyler Murray by any stretch, although don't tell that to Geno. He said it's an often ignored part of his game. Can't see Ryan Grubb leaning into that as a focal point of what Seattle wants to do. But to the Seahawks' credit, I mean, 20-plus points in each game so far this season, fourth highest percentage of plays with 3-plus wide receivers on the field, very similar to what we saw unfold while Grubb was calling plays in Washington. And when you look at how Seattle has performed, 6.5 yards per play when they have DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba all out there at the same time, they kind of got away from their bread and butter last week, though. Kenneth Walker didn't have a full workload. We did see him catching balls out of the backfield more as a dynamic runner. When you look at the 49ers defense and try and figure out a path to attack for Seattle, is it on the ground, is it through the air, or is it trying to find that perfect balance where Seattle can lean into some of the play action as well?
Boy, you did some reading, you did some listening to some pressers this week. I love it.
I figured there was a 50-50 chance I was going to have to record 42 minutes of NFL content on my own. So,
well, had I known you had that in the back of your mind, I maybe would have let you roll out the roll the ball out by yourself.
That's a privilege I don't need. If anybody's seen me in an open gym hoisting up threes, it's not a pretty sight any more than me trying to ramble about the NFL entirely on my own would have been for our listeners.
Every time you mention your abilities on a basketball court, I immediately go to the cable guy.
Jim Carrey actually a better basketball player than the cable guy than me.
Yeah, you're the glue guy. You're the guy at the Y with the headband sliding on the floor.
Like I said, my favorite quote, hey, if you're open, there's a reason you're open. Don't take the shot.
So what you intimated is absolutely bang on accurate. Ryan Grubb and Geno Smith had telling pressers this week. Grubb flat out said he blew it on Sunday against the Giants, that he needs to get the ball to Kenneth Walker more. And the exact quote from Grubb, establishing the run is critical to a lot of things. Play action isn't believable enough without running. Now, I don't agree with that last part, because you can run play action without having a successful run game.
Agree.
But I understand the premise, right? And Geno also talked about getting Kenneth Walker more involved as well. And as such, right, pro bettors doing this or locked into these pressers are immediately firing. And so we've seen Kenneth Walker's R&R yards move from 79.5 to 86.5 over the last 24 hours. Two things that make sense in this spot to me. The 49ers run defense has been its most vulnerable area the last two seasons. They're 21st in rushing success rate allowed through 5 weeks, 21st in yards per rush before first contact. You have defensive tackle Javon Hargrave on IR. Defensive tackle Jordan Elliott is out tonight, was kind of that rotational piece. Hufanga is also out tonight. The run splits for the 49ers defense when Hufanga is on and off the field are quite large. So it is a good time for Seattle to fire up the ground game. Grubb mentioned play action, obviously. He runs a spread concept. But even last year at Washington, he had Michael Penix throw with play action on over 32% of dropbacks. So that would translate to a top 5 rate in the NFL this season. Right now, Geno is QB 34 out of 36 qualifiers in play action pass rate at 14%. And I think why that's important for Grubb to dial up more play action tonight. The 49ers, number 1 in EPA per pass against throws without play action. Number 26 defending play action passes. So past Hufanga being out tonight, you have other players in that 49ers secondary that are a bit banged up. Javarius Ward battling a knee injury, hasn't logged a full practice this week. He's questionable. Jair Brown left the Cardinals game with an ankle injury. He's going to try to play, but don't envision Brown being 100%. Seattle will have success on offense if they're a touch more balanced and throw with play action. I really would try to put Devondre Campbell in conflict, make him defend through the air, right? That's not his strength. He's given up more than 8.5 yards per target. So get Kenneth Walker more involved, focus on play action, and I think Seattle will have some ability to move the ball tonight.
Interesting game for sure, especially as we've seen influential bettors jockeying on the side around the key number of 3. We know the schedule congestion for Seattle, not exactly a great scenario. You wonder if you get a full bounce-back effort knowing that they dropped their most recent decision, well, much like the 49ers did, outright as a 7-point favorite over the weekend. From Thursday into Sunday, and we head overseas to lovely London, where the Jacksonville Jaguars will start their first of 2 international games. This time, they are the designated road team against the Chicago Bears, and we're looking at Jacksonville, a 2-point underdog at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Total on this game has ticked down a touch from where it got as high as 45. We'll call 44, 44.5, more or less the prevailing price tag at this point. The Jags, this will be their 12th game in London, more played there than any 2 teams combined. Trevor Lawrence 3-1 in those London games, tied with Blake Bortles for the most wins in that department. And when we look at Trevor Lawrence, Payne, I mean, Jacksonville finally got going offensively. It, of course, took the worst defense in the league in the form of the Indianapolis Colts for them to be able to do so. But we know confidence can be contagious, and Tank Bigsby got on track, put together a tremendous rushing day. Brian Thomas continues to emerge as a true alpha in the room. We look at Christian Kirk starting to contribute. Hope that Evan Ingram will finally be out there dealing with that hamstring injury this weekend as well. Defensively, well, it is what it is for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Defensively, still plenty to be desired. Against the Bears team, where Caleb Williams starting to gain a little bit more confidence, but unfamiliar travel in this spot, a little bit more of an aggressive defensive line that'll face, and a Bears defense that'll have to step up in class a little bit given what they've played. No disrespect meant to Matthew Stafford, but didn't have nearly the weapons that they'll have to contend with this week with the Jags, and last week the Carolina Panthers are the team we all thought they were going to be. Rather than a true deep dive on this game, because there's a lot of ground for us to cover, is there 1 or 2 particular matchups that you wanted to highlight in terms of determining who you think gets the win and cover?
So first start with some of the movement, because there's been a decent amount. It was initially to the Bears and over early in the week. On Wednesday, both started to trend the other way once we got to Chicago. 2.5 on the side and 45.5 on the total. We saw some Jags and under money start to trickle in yesterday. Aside from price, which we may touch on a little bit later in this show, why we're having some difference of opinions is Caleb Williams. He's playing better. The Bears' first half pace last week was the fastest of their season, so there has been some, material change. I think the question becomes to what degree and how much has the schedule and environment aided that improvement of Caleb Williams. Last 2 weeks, Caleb is 4th out of 33 qualifying quarterbacks in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. Small sample size, right? Josh Allen's 33. So there's a ton of variance with small sample size. I think if you're a Bears fan, you love seeing that progression. Go ahead. You're about to say something.
I was going to say, look, if there were 50 quarterbacks, Josh Allen would be 51, given what we saw against the Houston Texans. But go ahead. I digress.
Yeah. So, there's a reason the best metrics you can use are schedule adjusted. And I think that helps place what's happening in proper context. The Rams defense has a new coordinator, extremely youthful along the D-line, a rebuilt secondary with its top cover corner out, and arguably the worst linebacking core in the league in God knows how long. And so, all told, the Rams are dead last in EPA per play surrendered, 31st in schedule adjusted efficiency. The Panthers are 30th in schedule adjusted efficiency and will likely finish dead last. They're decimated by injury. More than half the Panthers' defensive starters did not play. And so that's the context of Caleb's last 2 weeks. In fact, QBR week 4 against the Rams was just 38 for Caleb, 50 as an average quarterback. Caleb has also had the support of the ground game the last 2 weeks. Bears were above average back-to-back weeks in both EPA per rush and success rate. So if you believe the Caleb Williams improvement to be true, and you think the Jaguar defense everyone had pegged to improve this season, not us, but many people, right? Then you're saying Caleb isn't stepping up in class and should be fine. I won't necessarily argue with that. I just think the Jags' run defense is better than perception when you truly dig in, right? 7th in yards per carry allowed to running backs specifically, 7th in rushing success rate allowed. I don't think the Bears' ground game completely gets going like it has the last 2 weeks. A lot of the Jags' run defensive EPA metrics are skewed by a lot of short yardage rush touchdowns, and obviously touchdown swing EPA. Swift could have some success, though, like catching balls out of the backfield. That's been an area you can attack Jacksonville. Teams have also had success taking deep shots against Jacksonville, and Caleb has been willing to push the ball downfield. Let's monitor the injury report for Jacksonville. Top cover corner Tyson Campbell has been designated to return. The 21-day window for return is open. It doesn't mean he's back this week, and in fact, I would maybe side closer to him not going than going. He logged a limited on Wednesday. I think today's probably the most telling day if he has a chance to get back out there this week. What's interesting here is the Jaguars' usage of man coverage has been a hot-button topic that I think we've led, and the 1 week they deviated from that game plan was the exact wrong week to do it against the Texans and C.J. Stroud. I would expect it to be back this week in full force. Caleb has been substantially worse against man coverage. We know that's the Jags' preferred path defensively with Ryan Nielsen. And Caleb has seen 2 zone cover defenses the last 2 weeks. So if that gives Caleb some trouble and Tyson Campbell returns and there isn't this supportive run game, I don't think the Bears' offense is going to look like it did at home last week against Carolina, and that's kind of the sense I'm starting to get here, Todd.
And I think all completely on brand. The one thing I do want to ask you before we move on from this game, what do you make of the level of familiarity for Jacksonville making this trip annually versus a Bears team with a young quarterback doing it kind of for the first time?
I know that back-to-back games is interesting. We've kind of keyed last year, if I recall, on the second game in that window, but certainly I might as well just talk about it now. We're going to talk about it at the end. I think the conversation here in relation to not just the matchup we discussed is price. When you're at 2.5 here, and you would think, based upon the Jaguars playing 4 million games overseas, that there's going to be, when I say home field advantage, it doesn't necessarily mean the bodies in the seats, but this travel situation, how to handle it, the body clock, where to go eat. Everything has been
fish and chips. Fish and chips.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Jags' home away from home. We know they put an emphasis on the game based upon ownership. And so you have a rookie quarterback, you have a team making their first trek out there. It's going to be unfamiliar territory. And I think we talk about this all the time, right? You walk into your house after you get in from an evening out and the lights aren't on. Like, you kind of know where everything is. You can kind of feel and touch your way. But you do that potentially in a hotel room for the first time or an Airbnb for the first time. You're like, where's it? Like, you're kind of bumping yourself a little bit. And that's kind of what I liken it to. And so where I'm going with this is, like, at 2.5 in London against a Jaguar team that, we certainly have power rated right now, better than Carolina. And you think about what Chicago was laying initially, minus 2.5 against the Rams, and substantially lower last week in opened 3, closed 4. I don't know how we get to Bears minus 2.5 on, being fair, calling it a neutral.
Yep.
And you mentioned the things happening on offense, right? Tanks Bigsby is the more efficient runner. He's now getting, hopefully, the bulk of the carries. Brian Thomas flashing. Kirk flashing again. Evan Ingram, who was virtually a game-time decision, was warming up right to it. All expectation is that he'll be back this week. And I think the most telling thing is if you watch these games in detail, and I don't necessarily expect a Bears fan to be tuned in to Jags Colts on a Sunday, but the one kind of thing we've been discussing about the Jaguars the last season, like, who the fuck is calling plays? Is it Press Taylor? Is it Doug Peterson? If you watched closely last week, all signs point to, with Doug Peterson's job on the line, he's taken back play calling duties, and it looked dramatically different. And so there are my thoughts on the Jaguar game.
There we go. That's what we're looking for out of you. Comprehensive thoughts about the pride of North Florida as the Jags try and get things right. To your point, you mentioned the Jags having a luxury of playing the second game in a row in London. Unfortunately, I'm not sure it's going to lend itself to much opportunity when they draw the New England Patriots. Would have much preferred them to play an upper echelon team listed as an underdog, like we were able to grab them last year.
Buffalo last
against
year.
Buffalo.
Was that the Bills
Yep,
last year?
Exactly,
Yeah.
against the Bills. All right, into the...
Hey, we still got the Patriots win total, so
True.
hopefully
That is
they deliver a win.
That is a very good point, and we hope that Drake May isn't the great white hype under center to try and restore the Patriots' legacy.
What a terrible spot to start him this week.
Look, you got a defensive-minded head coach. You may as well throw him to the Wolves and go, you know what? A team that can get after the
Holy
passer like the
shit.
Texans with this offensive line, go ahead, Drake. We're going to throw you to the Wolves.
For me, it's about protecting the investment. Like we third-round pick. This is a really hardcore analogy here. And
Third-round pick, first-round pick.
Third overall
yeah,
pick,
gotcha.
I meant. Yeah. You ever watch those commercials with crash test dummies?
Yeah, I do.
I feel bad suggesting this about Jacoby Brissett, but I just allocated the third overall pick to this guy. I'm not going to have him shred his ACL. Jacoby Brissett's going to be my crash test dummy this season with this fucking offensive line that not only was horrific coming into the season, but is like starting UPS drivers back there. It's so dinged up.
The wild part about all of it, though, is if you look at the Patriots' schedule, not to go off on a tangent before we get into Commanders-Ravens, they go to London next week, which normally if you're playing Jacksonville stateside and it was potentially a road game, that'd be the perfect landing spot, you would think. But it's the Texans, the Jags, the Jets, the Titans, the Bears. I don't know if they can save Drake May until they play the Rams in the middle of November. So it just felt like an act of desperation. But to your point, behind that offensive line and the protection issues I saw last week against the Dolphins' defensive front, down a lot of key pass rushers, including Jalen Phillips, I'm not sure how long Drake may last, but that's the Patriots.
But clearly they're searching for the upside, right? His upside is substantially higher than Jacoby's
100%. And maybe his
Brissett.
mobility,
They're trying to capture
and
that.
maybe his mobility helps because Jacoby Brissett, despite us thinking of him as a mobile quarterback when he came into the league out of NC State, looked more like a statue at this point in his career.
Why would you think of him that way, Todd? Why would you think of him that way?
Because
Todd?
he was a mobile quarterback and could move around the pocket and throw on the run, Payne.
Let's move to the next game where there are two actual mobile quarterbacks.
Commanders, Ravens, and yes, definitely two quarterbacks on full display that use their legs as a major attribute for what they're trying to do. In the Ravens and Commanders, it's Baltimore, a 6.5 point home favorite, coming in off of that overtime victory against the Cincinnati Bengals, naturally coming at the expense of us and the Bet the Board listeners. Total in this game, we'll call it 51.5. There is a 51 at a prominent offshore shop. Total got as high as 53 before there was a little bit of buyback in this game. When we look at Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson, it's the only matchup since 1950 between quarterbacks that enter the game with 60-plus rushing yards per game on the season. When we look at the Commanders and Ravens, they have the most combined rushing yards per game, 389.6, entering a game, a minimum of 5 games since the 1975 Bills-Dolphins game. When we look at the Commanders, they've now won 4 straight games, averaging more than 33 points per contest, and the Ravens have won 3 straight, averaging nearly 35 points per game. The Commanders at 31 points per game, and the Ravens at 29.4 rank 1-2 in the league in scoring offense. 3 times, Washington as a franchise has finished with the NFL's number 1 scoring offense. They played for a championship, 1940, 1983, and 1991. No team, though, has finished with a top 3 scoring offense since the 1970 merger while starting a rookie quarterback for at least half their games. Credit to Cliff Kingsbury. Whatever he did for soul-searching, introspection, self-scouting has clearly paid dividends thus far for the Commanders because this offense has been dynamic. They've shown aggressive tendencies and willingness to go for it on 4th and short, going 8 for 8 on 4th down. But in steps a Baltimore Ravens defense, Payne, that's going to be stout against the run, but can be had through the air, as we saw last week with Joe Burrow playing pitch and catch with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins.
Well, I talk about this, Google Fran Tarkington and Steve Young. Those guys can run too, despite your
they can.
Your belief.
Tarkington was a man on a mission back there, scrambling around like a chicken with his head cut off. Steve Young, though, probably shouldn't have run as much as he did. Ends up with about 37 concussions by the time he had to hang it up. I don't know what you're insinuating over there, but I'm not seeing what you're insinuating.
It's kind of the correlation with Jacoby Brissett being mobile. I mean, he's got 12 knee braces on.
I said when he came into the league, that's why Drake May gives him more mobility at the position.
The Bengals.
Just go bet Drake May rushing props over just to piss everybody off.
You probably should. Yeah, there you go.
All right, Ravens defense, Commanders offense. You got something for us?
The Bengals blowing the 3 double-digit leads in the second half obviously screwed us in the moment last week, but it prevented us from having a nice price and situation in this game here. Would have loved laying, 5 on a desperate 2-3 Ravens team in this spot, unfortunately. Not the situation we are presented with here, and if you're just using metrics from this season, you'd probably find it very difficult to get to a 7 with the Commanders here, and so that's why we've seen this tick down a little bit if you're just using current season data. Now, Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury have certainly been all the rave, and for good reason. Number 3 in schedule-adjusted offensive efficiency, number 1 in EPA per play, 5th in success rate. So you're getting the explosiveness, you're getting the down-to-down success. The biggest test of the season was certainly last week against an above-average Cleveland defense. No doubt not as good on the road and certainly beat up with some injuries. But I think in totality it was the Commanders' toughest test, and they passed it. It was certainly Jaden Daniels' least accurate game as a passer, 5% below expectation in completion rate, managed to hit explosives. The mobility was certainly helpful, 82 yards on 11 attempts. Most of that was the impromptu scrambles that were super efficient. The designed runs were not. The Ravens' defense, to me, is a tough nut to crack. They're difficult to figure out right now because it feels like their range of performance just comes with a massive delta. We knew they would regress this season. It was obvious, right? That was like the number one, bang the table. They were number 1 last year with Mike McDonald, overarching 14th as we record this. And I think if you're a Ravens fan, you're like, hey, there's some signs of hope. But how good is holding a one-dimensional Dallas offense in check for 3 quarters? Couldn't do it for a full game. Do we now understand what the Bills' offense is? And so Baltimore holding those 2 units in check might not be as impressive or show the signs of improvement some think have been made defensively. We'll find out here. What's interesting about this matchup is the Commanders' offense has really flourished against defenses that do not generate pressure or blitz. Arizona doesn't blitz and they don't get pressure. Cincinnati doesn't get pressure. Ravens are 28th in blitz rate. They don't get a ton of pressure. When they do get pressure, I think Jaden Daniels has shown that he has some answers. He's top 10 in EPA per pass when pressured. The game's going to be squarely on Jaden Daniels' shoulders, right? I mean, he's unlikely to have support from the ground game, which you referenced. Ravens are allowing a league low 2.9 yards per rush to running backs. Brian Robinson is battling through a knee injury. Austin Eckler more of a factor as a pass catcher and could be, based upon game script here. We're starting to see Terry McLaurin really flourish in this offense. Target share continues to increase, especially in the money zone. Baltimore 26th defending wide receiver ones. So there's a path through the air here for the Commanders, but I just do wonder how many possessions they'll have if Baltimore's ground game is rolling here.
You speak of the Baltimore ground game, and it provides the perfect segue when we begin to look at a Commanders defense under Joe Witt as defensive coordinator that's trying to do everything they possibly can with parts that aren't elite by any stretch of the imagination. And it shows up in some of the stats where the Commanders are 31st in rushing yards allowed this season, 5.3 yards per carry allowed to opposing running backs, dead last in the league. They're 31st in passer rating allowed, even after clamping down, relatively speaking, on Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns last week. They're allowing a 123 passer rating when opposing quarterbacks are targeting wide receivers. They've given up 11 passing touchdowns, no interceptions. Meanwhile, here come the Ravens, who got their passing game on track for the first time all season against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals did a good job bottling up Derrick Henry, at least for a majority of that game, until he ripped off the 50-plus yard carry late. But you look at Lamar, 9.1 yards per attempt, 7 passing touchdowns during this 3-game win streak. We know what Zay Flowers can bring to the table. Mark Andrews finally showed up a little bit in the passing attack. If you're the Ravens, it feels like all of the potential tools are there offensively to attack this Commanders defense. So it's just a question of how Todd Monken wants to conduct his business. Is it playing keep away on the ground, or is it trying to build a lead and force a young quarterback to play from behind?
I think you broke down the game perfectly on this side of the ball. I don't really have much else to say. I think the Ravens are going to be able to get what they want on the ground. If you look at the competent offenses that the Commanders have played, really successful. The one offense in Cincinnati that's in the class of Baltimore torched the Commanders. So I think the Ravens get whatever they want. They should be able to run the ball. We've seen the Ravens' offensive line continue to improve and build cohesion as the weeks go on. It was certainly an area of concern to start the season. It was an area of concern in the offseason, but Rosengarten has provided some nice protection. Tyler Linderbaum is playing at an elite level. So I think the Ravens are going to be able to get what they want. To your point, I think the Commanders' defensive minds and Dan Quinn, they're kind of scratching for some things, right? And they're feisty, and they're sending pressures, and they're doing what they can schematically. They just haven't overhauled the talent yet, and you can see that there's just not much talent on this defense right now. I think Lamar Jackson has done a fantastic job in sack avoidance. The weight that he lost in the offseason has paid massive dividends, and you would expect Dan Quinn and company to send some heat. So, when Lamar's able to evade that, there's going to be some opportunities downfield. Jackson's only been sacked on 3% of his dropbacks, which is substantially better than the career mark.
Bengals had him strung out about 7 times last week.
Oh, my God. It was just unbelievable what I was watching.
Like slippery Pete back there in the pocket.
Yeah, I don't know if he had something on his jersey or what was going on, but I mean, they had him in the grasp and just could not bring him down. He's excelled throwing, in the intermediate parts of the field, and because the Commanders' secondary has been so bad, it's kind of taken this approach where we're going to blitz and play some off coverage behind it. And Jackson's just kind of feasting in that area. 133 passer rating on intermediate throws. The Commanders are bottom 5 in the league defending that area of the field against the pass. So if the Ravens aren't a little sleepy off their overtime victory against a division mate, and certainly they shouldn't be because they're 3-2, and you don't want to give away what you did last week and end up 500 in this game because you're going through the motions. Todd Monken is going to have his pick of the litter in terms of what's going to work here against this Washington Commanders defense.
Yep, it should be interesting. You mentioned the overtime game, and historically teams that come in on normal rest off an overtime game, not exactly great from even a straight-up standpoint, winning those games about 43% of the time if they play a team that didn't have to go to an extra period. So it will be interesting to see what the Ravens have from an overall intensity standpoint for, what do they call this, the Battle of the Beltway, the Beltway Bowl? I don't even know, given the level of familiarity and the rivalry that you highlighted when we kind of talked about the look-ahead number adjustments for this game on Monday.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. It was brought to my attention Sunday night by a colleague when we were going through some of these games, and he was like, yeah, this is actually a rivalry nobody talks about, and the players really have some banter about it because they end up, whether it's the offseason or bye weeks, they end up in the same hangout spots after hours.
They're all at Dewey Beach in the offseason, Payne. That's where they go.
So it becomes a kind of a little built-in rivalry in that area of the country where some shit-talking rights are had there for a year. And typically these teams face each other in the preseason, and so that game actually in the preseason has a little added emphasis because of that. But it doesn't get talked about at the national level that this is a little bit of a rivalry.
Probably because the Commanders have been somewhat irrelevant on the national level.
That's very true.
For the last handful of years, but this is potentially a rivalry that we can see going forward between Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, as always, for all things podcast related, be sure to follow the Bet the Board podcast, all of your NFL, college football needs, and NASCAR playoffs as well. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter, as the props that we send out on Friday have been absolutely smoking, and make sure you get that newsletter and you get those games in as quickly as possible. It's not nearly as liquid a market, and we've seen those things start to really take off once our listeners get a hold on some of those particular markets. When we go into the afternoon slate, Payne, it's the Detroit Lions fresh off a bye, headed down to Dallas to take on the Cowboys, who come into this game after snatching victory from the jaws of defeat in a game they dominated on the stat sheet, but needed some late-game heroics from Jalen Tolbert to get through the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's the Detroit Lions, a full field goal favorite, number leaking up at some shops to 3 minus $1.20. Total on this game now the largest on the board at 52. And when we look at the Lions, they're looking to start 4-1 for the second consecutive season. Haven't done that or better through 5 games in consecutive seasons since before you and I graced this fine planet back in the early 70s. Meanwhile, for the Cowboys, they're 0-2 at home this year, 3-0 on the road. The Cowboys had won 16 straight home games from 2022 to 2023. They've now lost 3 straight at home if you include last season's postseason debacle at the hands of the Green Bay Packers. From a trend standpoint, there have been very few quarterbacks better at covering numbers when they go on the road than Jared Goff, who's 13-3 against the spread his last 16 starts away from home. The Lions, in a sample size that predates Dan Campbell, 10-2 against the number following a bye week. And despite Dak Prescott getting the Cowboys home last week as a slight underdog against the Steelers, Dak just 2-8 against the number as a dog in his last 10 starts. So not an area where he does his best work. For the Lions, offensively, have to be brimming with confidence after putting up those crooked numbers they did against the Seattle Seahawks. We mentioned it of our breakdown of the Seahawks and 49ers. It was the best that the Ben Johnson offense had looked all season long. Jared Goff finishes 18 of 18, most pass attempts without an incompletion in a game in NFL history. David Montgomery continues to be that touchdown vulture from the 1-yard line. We've seen the Lions' weapons, but this offensive line should be a little bit healthier, too. The potential Frank Ragnow returns in the middle against a Cowboys defense, Payne, that may have looked great against the Pittsburgh Steelers last week, but this is a definite step up in class if you're going into battle without your 2 top pass rushers in Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence.
Yeah. There you go. I mean, you were really prepared to do this thing on your own. I may have you take this down the stretch for us.
I don't like the sound to that. So no, that's not something I'm going to sign off as co-owner of this company. So I just got a text message. I wonder if our best bet is about to get nuked here. Oh, lovely. Lovely.
So,
it would be on brand for us.
The joys of recording a podcast.
Yeah, apparently we just have to go live. I think that's the solution.
What you suggested here, I don't know how the Cowboys are going to get a stop. And so just to be fully candid here, we've been working on this game a little bit this week, so I'm going to be a little coy with the things said here. I don't know where the Cowboys go for a stop defensively. The Lions should be able to run it, should be able to pass it. We have seen a physical offensive style of play with Baltimore have their way against a far less injured Cowboys front. And you mentioned the obvious ones, right, with DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons. Sam Williams was lost before the season. Keeneland was lost on Sunday night. We have other guys in the front 7 that are battling through injuries, right? The green dot, Eric Kendricks. He's dealing with both a calf and shoulder injury. It was a DNP on Wednesday. Let's see what that looks like, but certainly not 100%. Nick Vigil, certainly not 100%. So I think what becomes, maybe if there's a saving grace, if you've listened to Stephen Jones, he claims Deron Bland has a real chance to play. Short of a setback, he should be dressed out and out there trying to help the Cowboys on the defensive side of the ball. So him and Trayvon Diggs making that 1-2 punch there in the secondary. But I don't see a world with Frank Ragnow returning that the Lions offense doesn't have success moving the ball here. I don't know where they go for a stop. And you mentioned the Lions kind of humming prior to the bye. That was their first real, go around. Maybe, the market necessarily, I shouldn't say isn't respecting it, because the line is certainly interesting here, and that's why we're working on it a little bit. But the Seattle defense was certainly banged up, so you don't want to take a ton from that. And maybe we'll find out that was just an outlier, but I think we have the data that supports the Lions offense being really good. And Ben Johnson having 2 weeks to prepare for a Cowboys defense that has certainly struggled a bunch this season. Wherever the Lions want to attack, they should be good here, candidly. I don't really see a path.
What about the other side? We know the Lions' run defense has been stout.
How do you...
To the Cowboys,
that's it right there. Yeah, I mean, that's it. Like, the Cowboys have kind of banged their head into a brick wall, right? Mike McCarthy says, hey, we want to be able to run the ball here. And maybe there's been some flashes from Dowdle, right? Against Pittsburgh, not bad. You can't run on on this Lions defense, right? They're number one in virtually every meaningful category a season ago. They only added to that room. I think the defense is going to be a little bit healthier this week. You got Brian Branch returning in the slot. So I don't see a path where this is anything but a Dak Prescott throw game. Now, that might not be necessarily a bad thing on paper when you think about the style of defense Detroit plays, right? It's a lot of press man, a lot of aggressive coverages. Cover one is something Dak and CeeDee Lamb have feasted on over the years. And we talked about this a little bit where the Dallas offensive line, which we had some question marks coming into the season, has been a little bit better in pass protection than we ever had envisioned with a lot of those new parts. So right now, 16th in pass block win rate. It's come back down to life. Obviously, we play TJ Watt and company. They were 6th heading into last week, so did struggle against a competent, pass rushing defense on Sunday Night Football. But this game's going to be on Dak and CeeDee Lamb. And is that two-man offense enough to keep up with the Lions? Now, it was nice to see Jalen Tolbert come alive last week. You provide another nice little option there. Getting Ferguson involved would be extremely wise. The one area where you've been able to attack the Lions over the last couple seasons with that linebacker combination is through the air, put those guys in conflict. And so, Ferguson should be a factor here. I think what's interesting is, people are probably listening to me talk about this game and be like, well, how is he not betting the over? Price. Our model spit out a number that was substantially lower than some of the 53 in the market. And when you got as high as 53, there was some money under. But because of these matchups, I have not gotten myself to the window despite there being some value in our number here. So an interesting game that we are still working on and figuring out. So I don't mean to be overly coy, but if there is something here potentially, okay, we're safe, by the way. We're safe. We're safe.
There is one game starting to get lit up like a Christmas tree right now that we had discussed.
They sent it to me a couple minutes ago. So
yeah.
that got sent to me about 11:15. Yeah. That's why I was a little fearful.
Not necessarily running to bet the one that's currently going
haywire.
Yeah. But by any stretch. And then the other thing, too, on the Cowboys.
That was what they said.
Yeah, on the other thing on the Cowboys-Lions game as well, you got a little bit of revenge for a game that the Lions felt like they were done wrong by the officials that everybody saw. I believe it was a Saturday game. I don't think it was Thursday last year, where they ended up getting home with a cover, just not the outright win. Final game on the Bet the Board big game breakdown docket. Sunday night, MetLife Stadium. Payne, it's the game that everybody's been waiting all week to see. The Cincinnati Bengals and the New York Football Giants. It's the Bengals.
It's kind of fun, though.
Yeah, it is kind of fun. There's just, I think fantasy managers probably a lot more excited about this game than the NFL purists that are out there with some of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's not Cowboys Steelers like
no, you're going to have
traditional.
You're going to have teams that can complete 4 passes.
Yeah, I just meant from like a brand standpoint. But the Giants have a big brand. I think this one is a little more interesting than potentially on the surface. Like the Bengals aren't a 1-4 football team, right? And I think the Giants have exceeded all expectations, and Brian Daboll's been fantastic again. I heard there was like some loudmouth former player that was bashing him in the media a couple weeks ago, saying that he needs to go. I'm like, it amazes me players are this clueless having played the game. But Brian Daboll's done the Lord's work.
I don't know what the expectations are. And the Bengals, a 3.5-point road favorite in the game. Total sits 48, more or less painted across the board. And you mentioned former players not knowing what they're talking about. It's not Brian Daboll's fault that the Giants are going to go into Sunday, and it'll mark the 21st straight time the Giants go into an NFL game as an underdog, the longest streak since the merger for the franchise. We look at the Giants, haven't exactly been great under the bright lights, lost 16 of their last 18 primetime games. But the one thing that they have done, Payne, and why Brian Daboll deserves a world of credit, they've won an NFL-high 12 games as a 3-point underdog under Daboll as the head coach. The next most during that same time period, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who we know operate with smoke and mirrors, cloak and dagger.
Text me that.
And a variety of other things.
When you're done, by the way.
Yeah, I can forward you that nugget.
Yeah.
And when you look at the Bengals on the other side, I mean, this is a franchise that hasn't exactly played a ton of primetime games before Joe Burrow arrived, but they haven't done all that well in this particular spot. When we look at a game like this, we know that the Bengals offense garners a lot of the headlines, and rightfully so. I mean, Joe Burrow leads the NFL in touchdown pass over the last 3 games. T. Higgins and Jamar Chase put together massive performances. All signs point to the Bengals potentially handing the baton to Chase Brown this week as RB1 as Zach Moss deals with a foot injury. Giants defense going to be down a key cog in Kayvon Thibodeau, but it's a defensive line that has probably exceeded expectations, mainly because Dexter Lawrence has been an absolute beast. But the Giants' offense deserves some praise as well. I mean, they went on the road last week against Seattle without their number 1 and arguably number 2 offensive weapon in Devin Singletary and Malik Neighbors, and find a way to establish Tyrone Tracy, the 5th-round draft pick out of Purdue. Darius Slayton flashes in the passing game. And you mentioned the way the Seahawks struggle against tight ends. It's Theo Johnson contributing as well in the Giants' passing attack. When you look at a game like this, I don't think it requires a deep breakdown of both sides of the ball, but one particular matchup that's caught your eye that you're most interested to see unfold under the bright lights Saturday night at 8:30.
Well, I mean, I think the fun part of this is you just have 2 contrasting offenses. And I think you had the right analogy of Brian Daboll and the Giants offense, that it's the NFL version, the pro version of the option offense. A lot of short passes, a lot of bleeding the clock, understanding that he's undermanned, right? And you want to shrink possessions when you're at a talent disadvantage. So you have a head coach that's cognizant of what's going on around him, right? He's self-aware. 4 straight weeks of Cincinnati's offense absolutely humming, by the way. And I think that's getting lost potentially based upon the overall record. It's a positive that Amarius Mims was able to return for the final possession against Baltimore, so all signs point to the Bengals O-line being intact, and I think that's important because the best part of this Giants team by a long mile is the defensive line. 4th in pass rush win rate, 9th in pressure rate, 1st in sack rate. So you're getting kind of a double whammy there. That's not the best analogy or phrase, but you're getting Amarius Mims potentially up, and then as you pointed to, Kayvon Thibodeau down with that wrist injury needing surgery. He's going to be week to week. The Giants secondary is extremely concerning. The coverages they play, Joe Burrow has traditionally, feasted against, just absolutely torched. And if the pressure doesn't get home, that horrific Giants secondary has been shredded. Teams are completing 84% of their passes when the Giants don't get home with pressure. And I mentioned the Bengals offense hum in the last 4 games. Joe Burrow has been excellent under duress. Now, Cincinnati's offensive line has improved in pass block win rate. It's been bottom 3 in the league the last 3 seasons. They're above average heading into this week. But Burrow's found a way when pressure has come. Number 1 in both completion rate and yards per pass attempt when pressured during this 4-game surge offensively. 2 more keys to this game, Todd, and they're on the other side, so I'll be quick here. Both are a factor before this game ever kicks off, but will have an impact on the market. Malik Neighbors, obviously. We saw what his absence meant last week to the market. I know the Giants went out and won, and goddamn, the Neighbors injury screwed us
that
because
game's
it
going
was
to drive me nuts.
Absolutely nuts. I mean, we were just sitting there waiting. It's like we can't give out 6 because Neighbors is going to get announced out. It's going to go to 7, and we're going to get emails and messages that you still like it. So he's still in concussion protocol 14 days after the concussion. Hopefully the next time he enters a game, he's got a mouth guard in. Today is a massive day. The new grill, it looks great. Mouth guard probably will be enforced here moving forward, is my understanding. But today is a massive day in my mind for the status of Malik Neighbors, and so we're sitting at basically like 3.25 as we record this. Some 3 juiced, some 3.5 that's soft in the market, and so his availability is going to move this line one way or the other. If Neighbors is out, that's interesting. And we've had something that also usually triggers excitement from pro bettors, the infamous players only meeting. And the Bengals defensive players had a private meeting this week that later became public knowledge if you're searching hard enough, where veteran corner Mike Hilton said in his presser, "We've been playing like shit, for real. We know we have to turn it around. to have a chance to make a run. This falls on us. So there has been lots of accountability. It sounds like Hilton is in line to play this week. Rankins is in line to play this week. He'll return to the middle of that defensive line. Defensive line got healthier in general last week against Baltimore. Didn't necessarily show.
No, the D-line performed. The D-line performed well. We'll give them credit for that.
Yes. And so I guess if there's a situation where Neighbors is down, Bengals defense healthier, private meeting going down in class from Baltimore's offense to New York's, you'd anticipate a slight uptick for the Bengals defense as well. Now this is, you're sitting here prime time. Every guy's walking to the counter with a Bengals ticket. But if you just kind of removed it and looked at this game from a matchup perspective, it'd be very difficult to buy the Giants, especially right now at 3.25 in my mind.
I would echo very similar sentiments on a game like that will take center stage come Sunday night between the Giants and the Bengals. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, be sure to follow the podcast and make sure you sign up for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter delivered directly to your inbox each and every Friday all fall long. All right, my friend, best bet portion of the program, and I know you had a little bit of apprehension earlier, but it doesn't appear the game we discussed before recording got touched up, so take us to the promised land, my good man.
Hopefully it's the promised land. I feel like
we need a bounce here, a bounce there, and start building a Jake Taylor-type winning streak.
I think, listen, number one, there isn't anybody more accountable than us when we're not winning. And I like what we're doing is the problem. I love taking Tennessee plus 4.5 and holding their opponent to under 150 yards, just kind of scratching your head how you lose that. I like, the Lions in a teaser, just kind of needing to win the game outright, outgaining their opponent by nearly 300 yards. I love what we did last week, taking a dog that's up double digits 3 different times in the second half. I just don't know how these games are losing, and I guess, negative variance over a short sample size happens, and it's kind of been the drastic delta between this and the newsletter going 5-0. We'd much prefer the 5-0 on this side, I can tell you that, because you can get substantially more down on sides and totals than you can props. But where some of the hesitation lies is basically what we did last week, where we kind of intimated, hey, we're recording this Thursday, we're going to give it out at 2.5 even money. Might make sense to wait just based upon where the public has their say in the NFL. And certainly there was opportunities to get 3 minus 20. I believe Caesars had it. You grabbed it. There's opportunities to get 320, 325 on the Bengals. I don't think we're going to have that opportunity with this game. And it's one we discussed earlier. It's time-stamped above. It's the London game, Jacksonville and Chicago. So I won't double down and waste your time reiterating or repeating myself. But let's go with Jacksonville. There's some 2.5 out there, right? I mean, usually I like teasers when we're talking about dogs in this range. I just don't really have a partner that I'm in love with this week. And I don't envision us getting to 3 here. So I feel a little bit more comfortable advising, hey, take the 2.5, take the 2 on Jacksonville. We made this game much closer to pick on a neutral field. You heard our thoughts in terms of how we feel this game is in terms of it being neutral, not neutral. So Jacksonville plus the 2.25, we'll basically call it here.
And Dougie P and the European sojourn we trust to get us to the window bright and early on Sunday for those of us watching breakfast football out here on the West Coast, and even a little bit later for those folks on the East Coast before the main part of the Sunday slate kicks off. Anything else you would like to share with our listenership before we take a little 72-hour break and we're back here on Monday to recap Week 6 and provide an in-depth breakdown of the Bills and Jets on Monday Night Football?
No, I think we're all good. Hopefully by that time we got a Jags winner. We're off the old schneid, and I think, at this point when we do what we do, it's, one game a week. It's a long season. I think our goal now is just to limit some damage. It's clearly not going to be a fantastic bang up NFL season for the podcast, but we battle. And so that's what we're going to do here. And hopefully it starts here with Jacksonville and London.
Stack one winner at a time. It's the only way to go about things in this racket that we love so much, some days more than others. For Payne Insider, I'm Todd Fuhrman. Best of luck to all of you, our loyal Bet the Board podcast listeners, with whatever investments you choose to make for the NFL Week 6 schedule. And most importantly, with a Jacksonville ticket in that portfolio of yours come Sunday. Late morning out here on the West Coast, early afternoon on the East Coast. We will see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.